Before we get to the story, I'd like to say thanks so much for visiting my new channel. I'm going to be uploading cosmic horror related stories every single day. So if that sounds good, please drop a like and don't forget to subscribe. It means a lot, especially when just getting started. I hope you enjoy the story. Wildlife biology fieldwork has a rhythm that takes a full season to internalize and that you miss when you're away from it. The early starts and the long transects and the particular satisfaction of a clean capture and a good set of measurements on an animal that will carry your tag into the landscape and come back years later to tell you something about how it's doing. I had been doing it for 9 years by the time I started the British Columbia survey, working primarily on large mammal population assessments, and I was good at the patient, methodical work that the job required. You learn to read a landscape the way you read a text, looking for what it's telling you underneath what it appears to be showing. And after enough years, the landscape gets harder to misread. The valley misled me for 2 full seasons before I understood what it was telling me. I want to be honest about that. I'm someone who is trained to see what's in front of them, and I missed it for 2 years because what I was seeing looked like success, and success is easier to accept than the alternative. The survey program was a long-term ecological assessment contracted by a provincial environmental agency, covering a study area of about 3,000 square kilometers in the interior of British Columbia, east of the Coast Mountains. The terrain was varied, old-growth forest in the lower elevations giving way to subalpine meadows and eventually to the bare rock and ice of the higher peaks, with a river drainage running through the center of the study area that connected the different habitat types into a functional ecological corridor. It was the kind of wilderness that doesn't have a lot of human presence. The nearest community, a small town about 90 kilometers by logging road from the study area boundary, and the research team operated out of a base camp that we established at the start of each field season and broke down at the end. There were 4 of us on the core team. Myself as the mammal population lead, a vegetation ecologist named Sura, who handled the plant community assessments, a hydrologist named Prek, who monitored the river system, and a field assistant named Olin, who was in his 2nd year and was developing into a genuinely good field biologist. We worked the study area from May through September, 2 seasons completed before the program ended, and the valley was a feature of the study area from the beginning. It sat in the southeastern portion of the study zone, a roughly oval depression about 4 kilometers long and 2 wide, oriented northeast to southwest and sheltered on 3 sides by ridges that kept it warmer and more protected than the surrounding terrain. The valley had its own microclimate, visible from the ridge above as a slightly denser, slightly darker green than the surrounding forest, and the initial habitat assessment put it in the high-quality category for most of the mammal species we were tracking. Good forage, good cover, reliable water from a small creek that ran its length, minimal human disturbance. The first season's data from the valley was excellent in the way that field biologists appreciate but don't examine too closely when the rest of the study area is generating harder numbers. Population estimates for black bear, wolf, and ungulate species all came in above regional averages. Camera trap data showed consistent activity. The animals we captured and tagged in the valley were in better physical condition than their counterparts in other parts of the study area. Better body condition scores, cleaner coats, minimal parasite load. We attributed it to the habitat quality and moved on. The tags were what started it. We used a combination of ear tags and GPS collars for individual identification, and the multi-year data these produced was the backbone of the population assessment's longitudinal component. By the end of the first season, we had tagged individuals across all our target species in the valley. And when those animals came back in the second season carrying their tags, I had a baseline to compare against. The comparison was what I should have questioned earlier and didn't. A female black bear we had tagged in the valley in the first season came back through a camera trap in the second season, and I pulled her measurements from the initial capture to compare against the camera image assessment. Body mass, estimated from the trap images using a calibrated scale station, was within 2 kilograms of the first season capture weight. Coat condition was identical. The physical presentation of the animal showed no markers of a year's elapsed time. No change in the slight graying around the muzzle that bears of her age cohort typically show. No difference in the wear patterns on her visible ear tag that would indicate a year of normal activity. I noted it and moved on because individual variation in aging markers is real, and one animal's data doesn't make a pattern. 3 more animals made the pattern. A wolf from the valley's resident pack, tagged in the first season, came back in the second with the same coat condition and the same body weight and the same absence of the physical changes that a year in the field produces in a wild canid. A bull moose whose antler development I had documented in the first season showed antler development in the second season that was consistent with his first season measurements rather than with a year's additional growth. A second bear, a male this time, came in with the same weight and the same tooth wear score as his initial capture. I went back through the historical data from previous research programs that had worked the study area before our contract. 3 previous programs across 15 years, none of them with the same research focus as ours, but all of them collecting opportunistic wildlife observation data that included the valley. I went through their observation records and found what I was looking for, and then found what I wasn't expecting. The valley appeared in the historical data with the same frequency and the same quality of observations as our own seasons. Healthy animals, good condition, consistent activity. And in the historical camera trap records, which 2 of the 3 previous programs had maintained, I found images of animals that were identifiable as individuals by their markings, the specific spot patterns and coat characteristics that make individual wild animals distinguishable to a trained eye. The same individuals, animals whose markings I could match across programs separated by years, showing up in the historical data looking the same in images from 8 years prior as they looked in our current season's data. I brought it to Sura because Sura was the person on the team whose scientific judgment I trusted most completely, and because I needed someone to tell me I was wrong before I committed to what the data was saying. She sat with the historical image comparisons for a long time and didn't tell me I was wrong. She said she'd noticed something in the vegetation data that she'd been attributing to the valley's favorable microclimate, and that she was now less confident about that attribution. She said The plant community in the valley had a composition and a structure that was consistent across all three previous programs' vegetation assessments, which 15 years of succession should have changed in ways she would have expected to see, and that it hadn't changed in any of those ways. She said the vegetation community looked the same in the current season as it had in the earliest historical record, which for a plant ecologist in a dynamic system was its own form of impossible. The third thing I found, the one that settled it, was the absence of juveniles. I went back through every season of data from every program that had worked the study area and pulled every record of juvenile animals in the valley. Young of year bears, pups from the wolf pack, calves and fawns from the ungulate populations. The kind of recruitment that a healthy population produces every season, and that any survey program working an area regularly would document. There were none, not one record across 15 years of multi-program survey data of a juvenile animal in the valley. The populations were stable, the adults were healthy, and nothing had been born there in at least 15 years. Nothing had died there either. No carcasses, no mortality records, no camera trap images of animals in physical decline. The population was exactly what it had been at the start of the historical record, the same individuals in the same condition, and it had been that way for as long as anyone had been documenting it. Sura said quietly that it was a closed system, that the valley had stopped cycling at some point and had been running on what it had when it stopped. I went into the valley alone on the last week of the second season to complete a vegetation survey transect that Sura had flagged as a priority before we broke camp. Standard solo fieldwork, a route I had walked portions of before. 4 hours of work in a valley I knew well enough not to be concerned about navigating alone. I want to describe what happened to the time carefully, because careful is the only way I have to describe something that resists precision. I entered the valley at 8 in the morning by my watch and by the light, which in September, in that latitude, was a reliable indicator of the hour. I worked the transect systematically, and at the pace I always worked vegetation surveys, the pace that 9 years of fieldwork had made automatic and that produces consistent time estimates for standard transect lengths. The transect was 4 kilometers, and my standard pace, with the stop time for measurements and photography, it should have taken between 3 and 4 hours. When I exited the valley at what felt like midday, felt like noon in the particular way that your body knows noon after years of fieldwork, my watch said 4 in the afternoon. 8 hours had elapsed on the watch. My body said 4 hours had passed. The sun's position agreed with the watch. I stood at the valley's edge and looked at the watch for a while and felt the specific quality of wrong that I had been accumulating evidence for across 2 seasons settle into something final. I had been in there for 8 hours by any external measure. I had experienced 4 hours. The discrepancy was consistent with what the biological data had been showing. Time inside the valley moving at approximately half the rate of time outside it. The animals that showed no aging were not failing to age. They were aging at half the rate, living twice as long inside the valley's boundary as they would outside it, their biological clocks running on the valley's time rather than the world's. The valley wasn't stopping time, it was slowing it, and it had been slowing it for long enough that the animals inside it had become something distinct from their counterparts outside, running on a different clock, decoupled from the seasonal and generational rhythms that structured everything around them. I filed a complete report with the program coordinator within a week of returning from the field season. The full biological data set, the historical comparison, the juvenile absence, the individual aging analysis, and a careful description of the time discrepancy I had experienced, framed in the most conservative possible language. I recommended the valley be flagged for specialized assessment. The federal review arrived faster than any environmental assessment I had encountered in 9 years of contracted fieldwork. Within 6 weeks of my report, the study area had been placed under a research moratorium, pending a review that the coordinating agency described as an environmental sensitivity assessment of indeterminate duration. Our research program was effectively ended, the contract closed, the team dispersed to other projects. I checked the valley coordinates on a commercial satellite mapping service a year later, the kind of service that aggregates imagery from multiple sources and updates it regularly. The surrounding terrain was current, the imagery consistent with the season it had been captured in, the topography and forest cover accurately represented. The valley's interior was a composite image from a different season, stitched seamlessly into the surrounding current imagery, showing the ridgelines and the upper slopes accurately, but replacing the valley floor with imagery that gave nothing away. Someone had put considerable effort into making the substitution invisible to casual inspection, and I only caught it because I knew the valley well enough to see that the tree canopy in the composite was slightly different from what 2 seasons of survey work had made familiar to me. Sura is doing wetlands work in Manitoba, and we speak occasionally. She has not mentioned the valley in any of our conversations, and I have not raised it. The animals are still in there, I have to assume. The same individuals, the same condition, the same stable, unchanging population running on the valley's clock, which moves at half the rate of everything around it. The oldest animals in that valley, the ones whose markings appear in the earliest historical records, are 15 years older than they were when they were first documented, and they look exactly the same. If the valley has been doing this for longer than 15 years, and the vegetation data suggested it had been doing it for much longer than that, then the oldest animals in there may be genuinely old in ways that have no reference point in normal wildlife biology. They've been in that valley so long, running on its clock, that I don't think they could leave if they wanted to. I don't think the world outside it would make sense to them anymore. The seasons don't move the same way in there. The years don't accumulate the same way. They have been exactly what they are for so long that being exactly what they are has become the only thing they know how to do. I think about that sometimes when I'm trying to understand what the valley actually is. Whether it's a place that preserves things or a place that traps them. Whether the difference between those two descriptions matters to the things inside it. I don't think it does. I don't think they know there's a difference anymore.